Great to be back again today with Matthew Dean Allison, my philosopher friend. And we are continuing our discussion of Piranesi, the book, and Piranesi by Susanna Clark. Last time we talked, we got to the second section, which is called A Description of the World. And I'm going to have Matt read those first 3 paragraphs there, and then we'll talk about it.
To avoid the algorithm chopping things, I'm going to skip some lines. I am determined to explore as much of the world as I can in my lifetime. To this end, I have traveled as far as the 960th hall to the west and other places. In all these places, I have stood in doorways and looked ahead. I have never seen any indication that the world was coming to an end, but only the regular progression of halls and passageways into the far distance. No hall, no vestibule, no staircase, no passages without its statues. In most halls, they cover all the available space, though here and there you will find an empty plinth, etc. These absences are as mysterious in their way as the statues themselves.
Speaking of statues, I found this cool visual. I'm going to put a share screen on here and show this thing. It's called the Appennine Colossus. And I forget exactly how tall it is, but it's huge thing. It's big enough that up here in the head, there is a room where they used to hold concerts, and the musicians would play and the sound would come out of the eyes and the nose and the mouth. Once in a while, they'd have a fire in there, and then smoke would come shooting out of his nose. The guy who built this just as a fancy for his estate, so that when people came to visit, they would see this wonderful thing and just have an opportunity to walk around it. But it shows the evidence of age. And so I thought maybe it was a good visual for us of what these statues look like in the book, although most of them aren't this large. I think the largest one he speaks of in the book is 15 meters high.
I think you're right. And did you say when we were off camera, the scale of the human?
Yeah, I think the scale of a human is about like my cursor here, maybe a slightly larger, but very small. There's no human in this picture, but you can imagine if humans are up here playing instruments inside that head, that this thing is pretty big. If nothing else, just think of the technology that was required to build something like that. And this is several hundred years ago, at least. I don't know. It goes back a ways. I don't remember the exact history, but anybody wants to look it up. It's the Appennine Colossus.
By the way, just a quick aside as we're going through these things, amazing comments from the first video. I just want to say personally, thank you to everyone. It offered, so much reflection in so many different directions that it revealed to me how unbounded this book can be. And it does lend itself to a book club orientation, I think, this book in particular, in its use of evocation. I mean, it certainly brought out that huge statue that we're thinking about now.
Yeah. Well, also the wonderful comments just show me what wonderful viewers we have here and how thoughtful they are and how deep they go. And so for anybody who's watching right now, I would love to hear your comments. And I hate doing this because I know everybody gets so tired of it. But if you would just like and subscribe, it would give our videos a little bit more visibility, because I I have these wonderful guests like Matt come on with all these great deep ideas, and it would be wonderful if more people could get to enjoy those. And in order to do that, we have to move up the algorithm. So so the last sentence you read was, these absences are as mysterious in their way as the statues themselves. And I think that's an interesting aspect of the reality of life. The absences are often as meaningful as the presences. We think about the words a writer chooses to put in a sentence. They could choose any word, but there's obviously trillions of words that they don't choose, and they do choose specific ones. So the absences are just as meaningful, or maybe more meaningful, than the words themselves. Or, it applies to anything. In art, the background is where there's nothing is just as important a shape as the foreground where the things are. That shape also has to be beautiful.
In that regard, we can, if what you just said of foreground, background is the space, juxtaposed to the space is time. And with time and space, assuming both are finite, in society, inevitably, people will begin to negotiate, hopefully on good terms, but maybe on otherwise terms, what to do with space and time together. And then others may come around with, since they've given so much time to the pondering of what could be, more refined argumentation that others should be persuaded by in deciding how to manage time and space. So where am I going with this? That statue you put up. Here we are on the other side of its construction. The argument for its existence is staring at us through a Google image. But before, on the other side of its existence, when pickaxe was hitting rock, or even beforehand, when people had to go and say, we need to transport from the quarry over there, which means we need to talk about what we think we're doing in the long term with your rock. To be a fly buzzing around those branches as the empty carts go to the quarry on borrowed time, to hear how these people talk to each other about what they thought they were doing with their time, and eventually all that rocky space. This is a question of how they instrumentally and intentionally used their language to keep going, patiently or not, on this journey of making that huge statue before its existence could justify itself.
Well, yeah. And if you think about it, before its existence could justify itself, there might have been debates on Twitter, if Twitter had been around back then. What a waste of money. These rich people are just doing this so that they can have some kind of a fancy thing in their backyard for parties. And this is there, around here. I live in California, and around here there are a lot of beautiful old mansions. Most of which were owned by the railroad barons at the last century, and they got immensely rich and they built these beautiful estates. And then when they died, the estate ended up in the hands of maybe some private organization who got it for a song, or maybe it's owned by the state now because of taxes or whatever. And so the public, we get to go and hang out at these beautiful estates. We can go on tours, or we can have picnics out on the front lawn. These things that would never have existed if it hadn't been for this rich guy who'd gotten immensely wealthy and built himself this palace. And so you have to ask yourself, did we really want to live in a world where nothing beautiful was ever constructed because it was a waste of money? And I think that's an open question. I'm not saying I have an answer for it, but it is kind of strange how things work out. And that big statue was just from our standpoint today, was a waste of money. But now there it is. Now it's its own justification, right? They actually sold this estate to somebody else, some other guy who didn't like the house, so he tore it down and rebuilt it. But they wouldn't let him tear down that statue when he tore down the house. So even the government has limits as to what they will allow to be destroyed. Okay, I'm going to go on here.
Yes.
I have observed that while the statues of a particular hall are more or less uniform in size, there is considerable variation between halls. Some figures are 2 or 3 times the height of a human being. Some are life-size, and in some, they only reach as high as my shoulder. The drowned halls contain statues that are gigantic, 15 to 20 meters high, but they are the exception. I've begun a catalog in which I intend to record the position, size, and subject of each statue and any other points of interest. So far, I've completed the first, second, southwestern halls and am on the third. The enormity of this task sometimes makes me a little dizzy. But as a scientist and an explorer, I have a duty to bear witness to the splendors of the world. I thought that as a scientist and an explorer, I have a duty to bear witness. Now, why do you suppose he uses those 2 words, scientist and explorer? I mean, who bears witness today? Who bears witness to the splendors of the world today? Is it the scientist and the explorer?
I think in the verb bear, we have something of a answer, something of a response, if not an answer. For thinking of witness, commonly we imagine eyeballs looking and, as it were, snapshotting a scene. And that scene is the frame of the visual field. And there it is, flat for us to analyze. What does it mean, though, in addition, to say that could bear something? As if a line of poetry bears the sound quality. It's not the emphasis, it's the emphasis, right? And the load-bearing weight of a line in poetry, or in some other sense, what would it be? The logic-bearing weight of a string of code, right? We see certain things scrambled on a computer screen during programming, but in the background, all of that is sort of the signal of how the zeros and ones should land. Internet connection is unstable.
Yes. I think it's on your side.
Well, load bearing, our Wi-Fi.
Yeah. That was good timing.
I guess it's a little better now. I think there's a.
So when you're talking about the programming thing, behind the zeros and ones are the mind that was trying to solve a problem by doing the programming, coming up with strategies for solving the problem in doing the programming. So there's several more layers of support in that situation. Exactly.
And that's the key. It's a situation with layers, and those layers are load bearing. So this is the problem of the one and the many in philosophy. And maybe indirectly we could hook it up to the ship of Theseus from our first episode somehow, because it's a problem of composition. In this multi-layering, where is the witness? Is it the top layer? Is it the bottom layer? Is it the middle layer? Is it the whole? But if it's the whole, where is the witness?
Well, I
What
think
is being witnessed?
I think it's clear, at least in one respect, because he says, I have a duty to bear witness to the splendors of the world. So if you look at it from a strictly scientist materialist viewpoint, they're going to bear witness to the 14 particles of the quantum physics and of the standard model, the up quarks and the down quarks and the charm quarks. And they're going to bear witness to that, which is not what we think of when we think of the splendors of the world. When we think of the splendors of the world, we think of the sunshine and the birds singing. And the other day I was out watering my yard and I had the hose with the water spraying out of it. And I was standing pretty still and this hummingbird started dancing around the edges of the water because the water's spraying out a little bit. And the hummingbird's getting closer and closer and closer. So I'm just standing as still as I can, like a statue. And that hummingbird got up almost as close as my hand. And I'm able to just watch this hummingbird fly while it's standing there trying to grab little bits of water off of my hose, taking a little shower. And, that's the splendors of the world. And that's in the wholeness. That's where the identity is. That's not in the parts, not in the atomization. And when he's bearing witness to the splendors of the world, he's bearing witness to the sheer, I don't want to use a cliche word, but like the sheer plethora of all these statues, right? I mean, they're everywhere. There's abundance above and beyond all that you could expect or think in every room. And every room has unimaginable wonders all around. And that's what he wants to bear witness to.
And in that bearing witness to the all around, which is not yet comprehended because there are more rooms than he has explored, and he knows it. And along the way, he's making these recordings, not only of what he sees, but its position, its size, contrasting that with the position and size of other statues he has seen. But as he continues noting, notice what he's also doing. He's setting up an alternate world, where, as it were, the shadows of these substances resides. The world of his experience, firsthand, and then his other hand, recorded experience that's safe in recording. But
so kind of the history?
Yeah, but it's sort of a mathematical problem in the early 20th century, right? Of the discovery of the infinite, where some infinities are bigger than other infinities, where if you were able to know everything that was important to you, you say, then effectively you're making a parallel symbology that is supposed to concord with everything. And so it's as if you've added to the infinite its mirror image, like an imaginary number that had to be invented to do something on a plane in mathematics, or a novel itself. Maybe part of what makes a technology passionate is this bi-realming of the two. But you can have upset expectations with that, just like in an earthquake, because the plates can shift. And if they're not quite right, you have effects that happen way over elsewhere. This is a sort of local history meets wider history, and sometimes the two don't talk to each other, born out of this bi-realming. The problems we create when we record history, we're not even aware of until later in history, you see.
Well, when you said that, the reason I smiled is that the other night I started watching this kind of stupid movie. Well, it's a really stupid movie, but I like Sandra Bullock and I like Tatum Channing, and it's called The Lost City. And the first scene, Sandra Bullock and Tatum Channing are locked in a romantic embrace, and you can't quite see where it is. And then they pan out, and they're on the floor of an old temple in a lost city somewhere, surrounded by snakes on the floor. And there's a bad guy who's telling her, you know, well, you thought you were finding the treasure, but I've got it now, and ha ha ha, you're going to be dead. And then she starts talking about these snakes, like, well, why are these snakes here? And how did they get here? Did you bring them here? And the bad guy says, no, they were already here. And then she says, well, that just doesn't work. Delete. And then the snakes are gone. then she doesn't like the bad guy. The bad guy says, but I can stay, right? And she says, no, delete. And so delete. And then you find out, I mean, this is not a big spoiler. This happens in the first 2 minutes of the movie. You find out that this is her imagination. She's working on a novel. And so she was trying to set up this scene. And then she realized as she's working on it, this bi-realming, this realm is not working the way it's supposed to be working. And there's all these unintended consequences. And I have to get out of here somehow because it's not working. So she started deleting all the parts that weren't working. And then she realized she had to start the scene over again and write it a different way. And that's just what you made me think of there. Anyway, it's a silly movie. It was a silly comment.
No,
let's move on.
Which part should we go to next?
Well, the next paragraph starts, the windows of the house look out. Why don't you read that?
Okay. They look out upon the great courtyards, barren, empty places, paved with stone, often four-sided, now and then one with 6 sides or 8 or even, rather strange and gloomy, 3. Outside the house, there are only the celestial objects, sun, moon, and stars. The house has 3 levels. The lower are the domain of the tides. That was very evocative to me, just as a bookmark. Their windows, when seen from across a courtyard, are gray-green with the restless waters and white with the spatter of foam. The lower halls provide nourishment in the form of fish and some other things.
And I just want to finish this one little bit up here. The upper halls, the domain of the clouds. So you have the lower halls, the domain of the tides. The windows are part of the lower halls, and they provide nourishment in the form of fish, crustaceans, and sea vegetation. And then the upper halls are the domain of the clouds. And the upper halls give fresh water, which is shed in the vestibules in the form of rain and flows in streams down walls and staircases. And what that really made me think about is how even here, where for all we know, he's alone here. We don't know why he's here. But, and obviously this seems like a little bit of a primitive situation. It doesn't seem like high tech in any way. He's not carrying his phone around, right? He still sees the world in hierarchy. It's almost inevitable that you have to see the world in hierarchy. The house has 3 levels. The lower halls, the middle where the windows are, and then the upper halls. And I just thought there was something there.
There's something there. What? So we could talk about the difference between the vertical and the horizontal, and we could talk about it from the subject or through the object. But the first thing that comes to my mind is there's something about embodiment that is timeless. Now, I don't mean properly timeless, as in the definition of a bachelor is an unmarried man, i.e., timeless truth. It's true within its own rules that are understood within their own understanding. So it's an endless circle. That's not what I mean by timeless with the body. But there is something about again, the ship of Theseus, how we are composed. And the fact that when our kind gives birth, the same kind comes. There is a uniformity to whatever our shape is. Every time, every generation. And it seems like it will always be this way, it seems. And
every apple makes an apple tree, right? Or has the potential to make an apple tree.
Yes. And we can spread out from that. Water seems to always flow down unless it's being evaporated up. So that's a take on how when we notice that things, so I'm talking about awareness now, when we notice things are a little further than our center, because in some sense the seed of the apple is in its center. The potential of a human being's procreation is from center. The moment we start to sense that we're moving out from center, things start to take the shape of probability. And we could say potential, we could say probability, but the water always flows down. Well, does it? Is that in the center of water to flow down? No, because when it evaporates and takes on a new composition, it doesn't flow down. So that's down and up seems to partake of that periphery from center. And I'm speaking with respect to entities and natural kinds. So we seem to find direction not in essence, but in something like experience, something like time and space. Because, I mean, in what sense is time and space in the center? It seems like time and space are more on the circumference of the center. I mean, we have to lay things out. Even a clock, it has all the numbers by which we refer to the passage of time on the circumference. What if we tried to privilege one of those numbers by putting in the center? Would it change time? No, but it would seem to offend our sensibility. Why can't we just put all the numbers of time when we measure time out in a scatter plot and just have at the right time, namely left to right time in regular intervals, move up, down, left, right, back, forth, as long as it's going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Why doesn't that seem natural? We can't really give a reason why, because I would argue it's not something from center that it's so obvious, but it's not so far removed that we have no idea. It's this middle kind of reached out distance of that just doesn't, it should be in a circle. It should all be equal.
I think you're onto something.
Something.
But yeah, because if you think about directionality being going out from the center, that seems to imply like the margins, and the clock numbers are on the margin of the circle, right? And the margin is that which is always touching up against experience, which has the potential for chaos, the potential, right, for something new, something unknown, and all of that makes me think about the conversation I had with Wolfgang Smith the other day, who is a physicist, and he has an icon that he uses. Let me see if I got a picture of it. Oh, here it is. Can you see that icon there?
Yes.
Very simple. It's a circle with a center and then an array. And the transcendent is the center. And then the circumference is the corporeal world in which we live, where all this potential resides out here, right? And the center, the transcendent, shines his light, creates the corporeal world. But this area in between, he sees as what he calls the intermediary space, and that intermediary, well, not space, that's incorrect, because the center has no space or time. The periphery has space and time, but that intermediary area has time only.
Say more about that, please.
Yeah, well, I it's going to be on my video.
Okay, fair. Yes, very good.
And I don't know that I even got to ask him specifically about that one part of it, and I haven't finished both of the books, so I can't really describe why. But the intermediary area is the place where the angels and spirits and demons and it's that the world we can't access without he says with some training we could access that area, but without some training we can't access that area.
This relates to the entropic, which has been a guiding motif and as a viewer and participant, but especially as a viewer of the meaning code. I've noticed the entropic, your use of the word entropic, and with your guests, the entropic, and particularly your guest who gave the illuminating analogy that is, in the good sense, stereotypical. You find it on both edges as a stereotype, arcing over many different cases, like sand on the shore, arced by this great picture, lock and key. When the key comes, where does the key go? The center. Well, is it the precise inches by centimeter center? No, because we're not actually talking about space, even though in a proper lock, it is spatially extended. There's a proper sense, but that conglomeration of matter, metal, in this configuration, such that when this other semantic and load-bearing object, carved just right and not any other way, comes through, it is unlocked. It's in a different state without becoming something unrecognizable. Because it is all there bound up in the matter, it is so easy to dismiss as mechanical. But mechanical is 1% of that overall reality, which the metal participates in as a layer, but is not the entire story of that verb of the unlocking. The center as not being spatially extended and yet being incarnated within the world, within the cosmos, within what is really all this, ties in.
Yes, absolutely. The transcendent who is both outside this world and incarnate in this world. So I asked him at one point, I said, I would feel very comfortable if we could three-dimensionalize this icon so that it's like a cone, and that at the apex of the cone, right, is the center, and that also in the center of the circle is the center, because then we have both the immanent and the transcendent. And he said, well, it's an icon, so I prefer to keep it as simple as possible, which I thought was kind of enchanting when he said that. But you brought up entropy, and I want to relate that to something that has to do here with the book, but I probably should wait a little while because
we'll let it entropically simmer.
Well, because we're going to get to the end of this section, and something's going to happen at the end of this section that you specifically wanted to get to so that you could talk about something. So let's just look at this. Between these two large uninhabitable levels are the middle halls, which are the domain of birds and of men. So we have the three levels, right? The lower halls are the domain of the tides, the upper halls are the domain of the clouds, and the middle halls are the domain of birds and of men. The beautiful orderliness of the house is what gives us life. This morning, I looked out of a window in the 18th Southeastern Hall, and on the other side of the courtyard, I saw the other, looking out of a window. The window was tall and dark. The other's noble head with its high forehead and neatly trimmed beard was framed in one corner. He was lost in thought, as he so often is. I waved to him. He did not see me. I waved more extravagantly. I jumped up and down with great energy. But the windows of the house are many, and he did not see me. So we are introduced to the other. Very mysterious. I remember the first time I read the book and I got to that paragraph and I thought, the other? Are there only two of them?
There is, as a brief aside in literature, we see it with Cain and Abel. We see it with the two characters in Of Mice and Men. We see it all over the place. Through our last conversation, I'm grateful you disabused me of my waiting for the bus with the other two characters, Estragon and Vladimir, of Waiting for Godot. There are far more worthy and animate friendship pairs in literature. And the question, what does a friendship pair do better or more optimally than any other configuration of sense data? And I don't know yet, because I think it's a large list, but one of the things it does is it takes opposites and shows how the immanent and the transcendent, for instance, can be friendly, if not more, or at least, I shouldn't say at least, because sometimes I confuse friendship with acquaintance. Friendship is simultaneously the highest and the lowest. It can be generative of well, how shall I put it? I'm starting to go too far away from things. The friendship pair, that's in the background. The writer would know that. The way she brings the friendship pair into relief, into the foreground of her story, is through the scientist / explorer and the other.
Well, and like I said, when I first started talking about this book, the scientist / explorer, whoever this is, I guess we could call him Piranesi.
Yeah.
Although that's probably not his name, but we can call him Piranesi. He has such a winsome way of looking at the world, and he is so gracious in his judgments. And so one would expect that he is also going to be gracious in his judgment of the other. And, you can tell because he starts out talking about how he has such a noble head and he has this lovely trimmed beard. And the other is obviously someone to whom he aspires for some reason. We don't know why yet, but he has very gracious judgments of people. But before we go too far down that road, I wanted to say something about friendship, because I think this is important. And I think it's something that the younger generation is maybe confused about. Because I remember when I was young, I was confused about it. What does it mean to have friends? And it wasn't until I was probably well into my 40s that I realized that most of the friends that I had had up to that point were either I was being mentored by them because they were older and I was looking up to them for wisdom and guidance, especially in the church, or they were younger people who were looking up to me for some sort of wisdom and guidance, even though I didn't feel like I had any to give. Or maybe just friends that I just hung out with for something to do, or maybe they weren't a good match for me, but they were just people that I hung out with. But I realized that I didn't have any what I would call lateral friendships, people that where we were on the same path, kind of on the same level, so that we could be honest with each other about our issues and not feel like we had to be on top of things for the person who's looking up to us, or under things, so that we could look up to the people about, just somebody that we could be real with. And And I intentionally set out to build a community of friends like that, because I wanted to be in that situation where I could be responsible and accountable, but at the same time that there would be somebody else that looked at me that way too. You know, we could be accountable to each other and enjoy each other's company. And I also think that people tend to get really worried when they're young because they think, oh, I don't have enough friends. Like they feel like everybody that they know should be their friend. Or maybe they'll grab onto one friend and make that friend everything to them. Yeah. And they don't understand that friendship is something that builds over time and maybe over a long time. And there might be people that you don't even feel very comfortable with at first. Maybe you're in a small group with some people that you don't know that well and you don't have that much in common with. But as you continue to be in fellowship and communication with each other over years, sometimes that can build into a very enduring friendship. Kind of like marriages who start off as, you know, being appointed by the parents. I think that's one of the big strengths of small groups, is that you get to know people on a very intimate level when you're sharing your struggles and issues with each other, and you learn to love and communicate with people that you don't know very well. But there's also a way in which I think that we have the right and the opportunity to be a little bit choosy about who are our deepest friends, the people that we ultimately end up being able to share anything with and feeling like we can trust our lives into their hands. And it might take a long time to find those people, but it's okay. You don't have to, I don't think you have to give yourself over completely to every person who wants to be your friend, because sometimes there'll be way more people wanting to be your friend than you can possibly handle. And then other times you won't have a friend in the world and you think, oh my gosh. So I think friendship is just way more complicated and way more of an adventure that people can be patient with and just enjoy the journey.
You're so right. And I think just that paragraph we read about it's not their first encounter, but it's our first encounter with their friendship and the state of their friendship, such as it is at this point in the story's chronology. And we're not given access to the inner soul, the inner eye windows of the other. So we ought not judge how the other is feeling towards the friendship, if he would even consider it friendship, or truly, based on the evidence of the book, we don't know if they have properly met yet. We have this because we're so close to the first person. We have a sense that they already are on familiar terms, but one is cold while the other is hot. And that is exciting insofar as literary friendships go, because we can see everything then. As Michael would say, this is an instance of the technique for compressing the possibilities of the story into something, which paradoxically expands wider than if you had simply been a fly in the room, or better yet, a surveillance camera ticking away, still framing, still shooting whatever happened to walk by and go out. But a few things about the description of the other through the eyes of the writer, or Piranesi, whose journals we are reading. The beard, the forehead. There's a technique in writing, because the question arises, how do I know when to begin and end a paragraph? There are many different philosophies to how long a paragraph should be and why. But regardless of the length, there is a logic for having paragraphs at all. And one logic for it is you can have them interact with one another. One great way to play them off each other is by question answer, but it doesn't have to be that bald. And what's neat about the possibility of having paragraphs interact is they don't have to be side by side in their interaction, although they could be. You could have one paragraph at the beginning and the next paragraph that interacts with it, properly speaking, 42 paragraphs later. What that does, the technique is called responsion, responsion, response, they're responding to one another, is they bundle together by a transitive property. So you go 110, somehow that bundles 9 and 2 and everything else with it. First paragraph, the 45th, they're responding to one another. It sort of bundles up everything else, all the 41, 40 paragraphs, 43 paragraphs with them. And the mind sort of gets it. You get it in a sense of, oh, we went somewhere. Oh, wow. That's what that all was for, a deep breath. And how that's achieved is a sort of mystery, but it does demonstrate a compressing effect that Michael in the comments has talked about. And I think has to do sort of with internet connection being unstable again. It sort of has to do with the crossing the line into the passionate technology. Because maybe strings of computer code have the same technique of responsion. But in longer form storytelling, it definitely is a key. So, all that to say, in the paragraph where the other is described as being framed by a tall window, a dark window, and the other's noble head with its, here's the key emphasis, high forehead and neatly trimmed beard was framed in one corner. A lot of things we could say. There's the frame and there's something in one corner. So we know this isn't the whole story of the other. Already in that dense, compact description, we're seeing one corner of this whole person framed by the window. But we're given the face, the person, the thing that sounds through the face of the other, and two aspects, the high and the low. The high forehead and the beard, which we don't need to hear that as, we don't need the adjective low forehead, we already know where it's positioned. And someone who's given Piranesi to the ambition of detailing where the position, where the size, what the size is of all these statues, is doing the same thing with this man he admires and wants to get the attention of. He notes the position of that high forehead in relation to the beard. The paragraph before is a responsion to this. So the paragraph before, or two paragraphs before, we're told what how the house is layered. The upper halls, we might as well say the high halls, give fresh water, which is shed in the vestibules in the form of rain and flows in streams down walls and staircases. So the logic of the house is whatever is high gives to whatever is below. But this other, so far, is breaking the law of the house. His high forehead doesn't have any dripping of something sweet down through the beard and out. In Proverbs or in Psalms, I think it's Proverbs though, friendship is given with the metaphor of oil dripping down a beard. How great it is to be with a friend, to be with your brother, how sweet the fellowship. It is like oil dripping from the beard. I'm paraphrasing. Maybe it wasn't the intention of the author, but this is a clear poetic trope of the sweetness of friendship denied. Because there's nothing dripping from the beard from the top. Even though all the decorum of the house in which people live demands that the high give down fresh water and streams to the below. And in this responsian technique of literature, we're seeing the contrast. And he's at a distance, and he's behind glass like a museum piece. But there is hope. It's only one corner. So the amount of compression is very astounding.
And I would also say things are not always what they seem. And they will go back and forth between what they seem to be and what they are not always what they seem several times before we find out the truth about that. Yes, I think you're onto something. So the next section is very charming, I think. A list of all the people who have ever lived and what is known of them. This is an entry from the 10th day of the 5th month. Since the world began, it is certain that there have existed 15 people. Now, that's a very remarkable statement, right? Since the world began, it is certain that there have existed 15 people. Possibly there have been more, but I am a scientist and must proceed according to the evidence. Of the 15 people whose existence is verifiable, only myself and the other are now living. I will now name the 15 people and give, where relevant, their positions. So the other people he's going to name are no longer living. So, I mean, we know that. Here is where I want to drop in something about this issue of entropy.
Please.
And I'm going to try to share screen so that you can read this together right here. Can you see this notes thing in the center of the screen?
Yes, I can.
Okay. This is a note that I got from my physicist friend Glenn when we were working on the whole issue of entropy. He says, first, the notion that entropy is a measure of some kind of disorder only works when you're looking at final equilibrium states. But as other physicists and chemists have pointed out, the universe is barely ever at equilibrium. In which case, this textbook definition of entropy doesn't make any sense. Over the years, I've transitioned to thinking of the universe as proceeding on a path of forgetfulness. The final equilibrium state of any forgetting process will, of course, be the most disordered one. The notion of forgetfulness applies to any situation, both non-equilibrium and equilibrium. If you start from forgetfulness as a concept, if you start from forgetfulness as a concept, then you will naturally get taken to the notion of disorder as a statistical outcome in a final equilibrium state. Let's apply this idea to a piece of art. Imagine that as you start painting, you start changing things, but consider a universe where you couldn't erase or paint over anything. The artwork had no way of forgetting what you had previously painted. This would make the creative process impossible. But once a painting is done, then a different kind of forgetting starts to take place. That is, as the chemical structure of the paints and the canvas start to decay over time. When you're seeing the second law come into play in both the creation and dissolution processes, you're seeing the process of forgetfulness playing out in two different arenas, depending on whether you're putting the paint on the canvas or the canvas is hanging on a wall for the next century. Now, here's what I'm thinking about this. In this book, as we will find as we move along, forgetfulness is a very big part of the story. And I think there's something here. If what Glenn is saying about forgetfulness and entropy is true at the level of physics, then if I'm right in the way that I look at the world, if it's true at the level of physics, it's also true at the level of our psychology, and it's true at the level of the way that we experience the world. So the forgetfulness is the, in one way, forgetfulness is the gift that allows you to keep moving ahead. Because in the creative process, you have to be able to erase certain things and add new things. You have to be able to forget what you had before. The painting doesn't forget. I mean, years later, chemists can still look at that painting with what is it called? Tomography? Some sort of, I don't know, some sort of MRI for canvases. They can look at them and they can see all the layers of paint under there, and they can see what was covered over. But anybody else looking at it is not going to have access to what's underneath the top layer. They can only see the top layer. But in a way, that's a gift of creativity. But so that's why entropy is kind of a gift that allows the world to keep moving forward. And it certainly plays out in this in the life of the protagonist in this book, that he's living in a world of forgetfulness right now because he doesn't remember who he really is or where he really came from. And all he knows is what he knows of the house right now. Yes. And so his time parameter is very small for him. From the beginning of the world, there have only been 15 people. So he's living in this kind of forgetfulness. And I think there's something there about the entropy. Maybe it will become clearer to us as we move along.
And it ties in with the exploration component. As we said earlier, time can be at the center, but not space. Well, with creativity having at its core the mechanism of forgetfulness, which I agree with. I'm coming around to what you and Glenn have said. Because that sort of solves a problem of the load bearing that we had talked about at the beginning of this video. It doesn't bear, not everything is born at once, B-O-R-N-E, born on the shoulders at once. And yet it seems as if truly everything is. In the Christian story, we're told to bear our cross, and we are not merely speaking of the wood. Well, what are we speaking of? What is the upper limit of what we mean by saying we will take it upon ourselves with joy to carry our cross? What's the stacked leveling of that? Well, in some respects, we don't have, I won't say in some, in a very important way, that's not a question we have to entertain. If we give time to this forgetfulness, because in the same way that painting's pigment and the arrangement of the shapes on lines beneath the pigment preserves the structure, preserves the memory in this drama of time so that we can move forward, the cross becomes now this dynamic thing, because it stays what it is as we move it forward on ourselves. So, but I think that participates in the forgetfulness somehow. And this character who doesn't have any memory of any kind of faith or any kind of culture, as you said, there's no tradition that he can just fall back into. He has to explore 360 degrees, not just the arrow forehead. So he thinks. And so the house becomes this radar of all the places he might go. And so he just starts going out until he has to come back, right? He has to go out and then come back. It's like going out with your fire until, no, too far out from home where the food is. And I got to come back. And I don't want to be away from the other for too long. He might need me. So, and maybe that's part of why the bird is there, right? In the middle is the human being and the bird. The bird flies, but there's a nest. And that nest is sort of the time center that you come back. The thing about a nest is, in its composition, it's very much a ship of Theseus. When does the nest begin? With the first twig or the 48th twig? Or does it begin somewhere in the cerebrum of the bird that just knows, go find twigs? And it doesn't say twig, that's a concept. It finds this thing of a certain texture and weight. I don't know how it weighs it with its feet as it goes up, with its hollow bones. It knows that's just right to begin with. And then the other one, that's now going to be at the top. And then this is going to be, where does the nest begin? Quantifiably? Don't know. But then when it flies away to do whatever birds do with their wings for a period of time, exploring, it's still there, like the painting. And so birds, like humans, exhibit, to go with this forgetfulness, the forgetting of its production in order to be what it is for the time being. And then it comes back to it. And it has its children there. So we're starting to see the house, the nest, the venturing out. And in that way, this problem of the layers mixes with the exploration and the scientist as we keep going. That's very...
Well, so when you think about doing an artwork, I'm specifically thinking this is a little bit of an odd example because I don't know anybody else who does this kind of work, but sometimes I go out to a fundraiser or something and I have everybody at the fundraiser put a daub of paint on the canvas. And so until it just turns into this big chaotic thing with all these weird colors and shapes. And some people will make little hearts and some people will make squiggles and some people will try to paint a bird or a tree or something. And so the whole thing just turns into a big mess. And then I look at it and I try to figure out how to pull it together and turn it into something that has, I try to find the ship of Theseus in there, try to give it a composition, give it a meaning and a purpose. And in so doing, I have to cover over some of those other things. Some of them I can let peek through and other ones have to get covered up. And sometimes people will come around and say, oh, but you covered my mark. And I say, yes, but your mark was very important because when I was looking at that mark, that informed the next thing that I did. So even the marks that are forgotten, even the marks that get covered over in our lives inform the next thing. So all of our experiences are like that, right? Some of our experiences may be forgotten. I've lived a lot of life and a lot of it has totally been forgotten. And yet it's written into me at some level and has affected the next things that happen. So there is that quality about forgetfulness that it's actually recorded somewhere. You know, even with entropy, I'm pretty sure all that stuff is recorded somewhere, but it may not be accessible. And the other thing is that one of the things that I think it was Shannon discovered this. Who was it discovered this about information? That, when they were looking at the Maxwell's demon, why isn't it possible for a little imaginary demon to move particles back and forth so that all the cold particles would end up on one side of the box and all the hot particles on the other side of the box, so that then it could be used to produce energy? Because then you could open the door and let the hot flow over and that would actually do work. But it seemed like it was going against the law of entropy, because the law of entropy says that entropy will always increase, disorder will always increase. But what they finally figured out was that with information, there comes a certain point at which they have to erase the information in a data bank in order to keep moving ahead, because you build up too much information inside the demon. Too much information is built up about where all the particles are, and that information has to be erased. And the erasing process requires energy. So it was still requiring energy to do the work. It's just a different kind of energy. It was the energy of erasing information. It was the energy of producing forgetfulness. So there's a lot of ways that forgetfulness ties in with entropy.
And this, I know we're hovering over this for a little while, but I think it's worth it because it brings us then into what you said about friendship and how it's not a trivial thing to, I like what you said about calling it adventure, because indeed it is an adventure. The friendships I've had and the friendships I have and the friendships I hope to have will be adventures. And I don't want to detail out that because it would take too long, but what do I want to say? the relation between the creator and the created, God and human, God and the world. In the Middle Ages, the phylogenetic tree, or the tree of Porphyry, down to the worm, up to the angel. People will go back and forth about, well, what really happened when the second person of the Trinity took flesh. And on one level, I won't even say on a level, in dogma, which is to say, in the most profound respect, in general, we are not to try to speculate on such thing, because it's designed to keep us from pretending to know. And it's to keep us safe and not having to know, which is sort of wonderful. It's what a house does for a family. The family doesn't have to know exactly how the plumbing goes, exactly where the asbestos is, as long as there's a wall. And they don't have to understand the equations that allow electricity to flow in a current. What they need, as Jordan Peterson would say, is the infrastructure. And that is a sort of larger family, if you will, of society. But I don't really like that sort of language of families within families, because I don't think that really goes after what we're trying to say. What's neat about friends, whether that friend is a husband, a wife, a girlfriend, a boyfriend, or a very deep spiritual friendship, or just a friendship where you realize this person may not be my life forever, but without them, I will not cross a threshold. I remember when I was so nervous about a job interview that I would not bring myself to go, my good friend drove me there 2 hours. And then when I stepped out of the car, we were in the back of the restaurant of the place. It's a fancy restaurant. He said, if I go around this loop and you're still here, I will hit you. So you better not be here. You better be inside when I come back around. And we didn't spend the months after that playing board games together. We didn't spend the months after that talking every night on the phone. We sort of went our separate ways, looking over our shoulders to each other as our paths diverged. But without him, I would not have walked in the door when I needed to. I might have eventually, but it would have been too late. And so part of this adventure motif is sometimes a friend is activated in the other for the purpose, or in the purpose of the other to do something. And in seeing that other person do something through your presence and agency, you are reminded of something that you would not have taken seriously otherwise. And so it's a wonderful meeting of the mind and body in two different persons who are not the same and never become the same. And I think that's what I'm trying to say with all of that is that's what love, that's in many ways, I won't say that's what love is, but in many ways, that's what love does. Right? It through people and through the many, it collects and it allows activity to occur and things to be shown with significance that without this thing called love, it would have all just compressed into one thing and been nothing, right? So integral to having a friend and to being a friend is putting patience on a very high level. I keep coming back to that. Love and patience. We have to wait for love, and we also have to be trained, to use the language of the author you quoted. We have to be trained in some sense to show love, which requires time and patience. It's not a magic spell that can be cast, love. We don't even know what love, we don't even know what we're doing. And yet sometimes we find ourselves raptured into, right? Caught into, at the right place at the right time, sort of thing.
And your friend sacrificed on your behalf. 2-hour drive is not nothing, right?
So I guess I'm just trying to say, like, in the secular age, love is usually the move is to reduce love to a pleasure, to exchange this for that. It's something that you can point to and indicate. This is a cup, that is love, this is not love, this is what I want. Communication is fine, but as the ancients would say, love is a transcendent value. And I think through the book like this and through our conversations, I'm starting to see how that actually applies to the corporeal. Like what a phrase like that even means for something to be a transcendent value and imminently known. It's starting to percolate.
Well, I think when Wolfgang Smith is talking about the corporeal.
Sorry, that sounds like, oh, are you frozen?
You are frozen. There you are. Okay.
There we go.
When Wolfgang Smith is talking about the corporeal, he's talking about this real world that we live in. This cup is a cup and it's yellow. And that really exists. It's not just in my head that this exists. And it's not just in my head that this is yellow. You know, a lot of scientists will want to say that the only reason this is yellow is because of the way the light is refracting off of the lens of my eye. But he says that this actually is a yellow thing in the world. And my hand is actually a thing in the world. And for some physicists, that's quite a leap, I guess. But so the corporeal is the part around the outside. The center is where there is no space and time. So that's the transcendent. And then the mysterious part is that part inside the circle, the intermediary, where I asked him actually in the conversation, which you'll hear, is that where people go when they take psychedelics? And he said, oh, absolutely. That's why it's so dangerous. Because you don't know what you're going to run into there, because it actually is a place. You don't hear many physicists talking about that either. And so I don't want to give away too much before we get to that conversation.
Indeed. But I think this relates to the problem of suffering. Because we're in the age of propositions, right? And how do we go from lining up propositions to have a domino effect of truth at the end with all the bells and whistles and fireworks of, isn't it all coming together? How do we really have real motion alongside these propositions of atomic data? It's sort of the way the dichotomy of a secular world is put out, because if we just have extended matter and that's really all that there is, how can we have such a thing as love? Obviously, love is a word for some epiphenomenon that's hazy, fuzzy, it's probabilistic, it's not really there, and it's the best we can do because we're so high up in evolution that we can't really think an electron because we can never be an electron, blah, blah, blah. I'll take the symbol of faith, for instance, in Christianity. When we recite, he suffered under Pontius Pilate. My priest said this to me last week when I was talking to him about patience, because for many reasons in my life, I want to be patient, because I'm finding that the fruit ripens if you wait. And it's so beautiful in the afternoon light if you wait. But if you don't wait, everything is raisins. Everything's raisins in a box with a sticker on the side of 99 cents, lined up with other boxes on that same shelf under really ugly white light. But life doesn't have to be that way and one doesn't even have to wait very long. But why didn't God just snap his fingers, do a Thanos thing in the reverse, where instead of everything being fallen, everything was upright? Certainly God could have. I mean, I don't think it's irreligious to say he could have. But why did he not? I'm not going to say I know why, because I do not. But we do know in the creed that he came down for human beings' salvation. So we know why. We may not know why he wanted to save us, but we believe he loves us, but we know why he came and why he suffered to save us. All right. Still, though, why didn't he just save us with an instant? Would we have even known what happened to us? Would we have even believed had we known what happened to us? And thirdly, would we have even been given the free space to respond to what we believe happened to us then? 3 or 4 degrees of life in a single act. But if it's all maybe.
Well, and if it's this easy, then why wouldn't we just snap back again and fall immediately?
Exactly.
Right.
And exactly.
Because there wouldn't be any fundamental change internally. Everything would be set right, but I would still have the potential, the same potential that Eve had, the same potential to say, well, yeah, but thanks very much. That was great. Now I can handle it on my own from here on out.
Exactly. It's like a lightning flash, right? The lightning flashes in an instant, and then it's gone. You're like, wow, that's over with. I'll go back to my neutral space in whatever land I've conceived of. Something about being human, being passable. There was a time when everything good flowed from above. And we knew we were participating in the above and going to higher and higher levels as we enacted with our friends, the deep ones that we've chosen, like you said earlier. In the same way that as friendship blossoms, as love relationships begin to show what they are in their uniqueness between unique people over time, there's this sense of, if I had not waited, I would not have seen. And if I was not patient and bit my tongue, I wouldn't have been able to realize why that person was venting their bad attitude. It was really because of this other thing that I wouldn't have seen in the moment. I had to wait, and they had to wait with me. And there had to be this vulnerability that was freely given to each other, and we don't have to exactly know why. And it certainly can't be put in a computer and programmed so that I could have it with an inanimate object. So all these things have to be anthropomorphically, like an anthropic principle for existence itself. There has to be this fine-tuning of the whole world and history in order for human beings to have friendships and for patience to have meaning in the interim. We wouldn't have known how much God loved us if he wouldn't have suffered on the cross and died and been dead for 3 days and then resurrected. It was not because that's what God was beholden to do. God couldn't do it any other way because the rule of how to do it is above God. He did it so that we would have nothing but proof. It's another way of saying the limit story, right? I mean, if you just tell yourself the story of the passion on the cross, the death and the resurrection, you're telling yourself what love is, or you're giving yourself the same thing, a bi-realming of, if you wanted to experience love, even if there was no such thing, but you wanted to make yourself feel the fantasy of this thing, you would probably tell that story or a version of that story. And the great thing is, if you want to believe, is that isn't just a story, it's actually it's actually the world. But that's not a lightning flash. That's a choice on the part of the person. And it's made multiple times in a day and in a week and in a month and in a whole lifetime, right? But it's very much the same in having boyfriend, girlfriends, having husband, wives, having friends. You sort of, in order to really have a friend, you have to trust that person to be a friend, which means you have to kind of give them opportunities, which means you can't just say, why aren't you talking to me? Don't you know I have trauma? And I'm going to use this trauma as a weapon to get you to sympathize with me and be with me and give me your, you know what I'm saying? That's what I was trying to say with all of it. Sorry,
Yeah,
I'm going on a little word
that
salad.
was a brilliant summary. Well, and on the other side of it, we have to trust ourselves to be able to be a friend, to be that friend, right? I'm going to link to Paul's conversation today, which was just excellent. Paul was responding to a young man who's having a hard time getting further in the whole idea of faith. This young man had made a comment, faith is not as easy as it sounds. And so Paul made a response video to it, which is just brilliant, from C.S. Lewis's book on miracles and also from the Heidelberg Catechism. And that whole thing that you just laid out is basically part of Paul's argument from the Heidelberg Catechism. It was really a beautiful video. So I will link to that in the notes about the intersection between faith and friendship, because there certainly is. Before we wrap up today, I wanted to, I don't think we don't have time to go through all 15 people who are now alive since the beginning of the world, but maybe we can just do the first two.
Okay.
The first person, myself, I believe that I am between 30 and 35 years of age. I'm approximately 1.83 meters tall and of a slender build.
The other. I estimate the other's age to be between 50 and 60. He is approximately 1.88 meters tall and, like me, of a slender build. Strong, fit. His skin is a pale olive color. Short hair, mustache, dark brown. Beard that is graying, almost white, trimmed, pointed slightly. The bones of his skull are particularly fine, with high aristocratic cheekbones and a tall, impressive forehead.
The overall impression he gives is of a friendly but slightly austere person devoted to the life of the intellect.
He is a scientist like me, and the only other living human being. So naturally, I value his friendship highly.
Now, this is all very interesting, isn't it? Because here he is, as far as we know, he has no technologies around, but somehow he has some way to measure, and he knows that he's 1.83 meters tall. Seems oddly specific, doesn't it? And the other is 1.88 meters tall, oddly specific.
Now, one hair.
Somehow he has some sense of how old he is, between 30 and 35 years of age. If you have no memory of anything before, how would you be able? I mean, first of all, just to have the concept of age is I mean, if you think about it, if your memory was just wiped and you're starting out from scratch, you wouldn't even have a concept of age.
You're right.
So I think it's all very mysterious. He goes on to say that the other is a scientist like me and the only other living human being. So naturally, I value his friendship highly. The other believes that there is a great and secret knowledge hidden somewhere in the world that will grant us enormous powers once we have discovered it. What this knowledge consists of, he is not entirely sure, but at various times he has suggested that it might include the following. Number one, vanquishing death and becoming immortal. Number two, learning by a process of telepathy what other people are thinking. Number three, transforming ourselves into eagles and flying through the air. Number four, transforming ourselves into fish and swimming through the tides. 5, moving objects using only our thoughts. 6, snuffing out and reigniting the sun and the stars. And 7, dominating lesser intellects and bending them to our will. I have a feeling that maybe number 7 is really the only one that the other is interested
in. The means to an end.
Yes, I mean him along with Putin and Xi Jinping and a few other folks like that, dominating lesser intellects and bending them to our will. The other thing that I catch there is that somehow the other has communicated that he's kind of brought Piranesi into the elite corridor by saying the other people outside of us are lesser intellects, but you and I are higher intellects, right? And so he's allowed Piranesi on the inside. But since there are only 15 people in the world and all the rest of them are dead, I wonder who these lesser intellects are going to turn out to be.
It's lonely at the top. It might be one of the other corners we don't yet know about. The other is, as a human, he may be lonely. Naming everything else, he might be missing something.
So I have a question for you. Mm-hmm. Have you finished the book?
Oh, Piranesi? No, not yet.
Oh, great. That's why you're saying some of the things you're saying. Mm-hmm. Okay, cool.
I'm on chapter 2.
That's really cool. That's really cool that you haven't finished the book. So I've got the privilege of knowing ahead of time, and you don't know. And so I can point out the mysteries, and that'll work very good for our viewers, I think. I would like people to put in the comments whether they like this bit of going section by section, or if they would prefer for us to go chapter by chapter.
I agree.
I guess they're not called chapters, they're called parts. The first part is 20 pages long. The second part is probably another 20 pages long. So we could go part by part, or we could continue along like this, section by section. People might want to read on their own a little bit, and then we move ahead a little bit faster. But I'll take a poll in the comment section from the viewers so far who want us to continue. And also, I think next time we get together, Father John Beadle is going to join us.
Wow.
He was with us. He was with me a while back when we reviewed the overall book. And
I enjoyed that video.
I think we did maybe we did 2 episodes on it. Maybe we just did 1 episode on it. But anyway, it was great fun. And he's going to join us, kind of expand our borders a little bit.
And he was bringing in the aspects of the magician's nephew.
Mm-hmm. Mm. Yeah. Yep. I also think that there are some corollaries with the Silver Chair by C.S. Lewis. Now maybe an upside down version of the Silver Chair.
It's so I'm finding that in reading this, every book has its own pace. All books have more or less the same number of words per page, whatever book you go to, but that's not the way to read them. They're not digital, where the metronome is always going at the same speed. They're very much, every single book is its own kind of carved wood instrument, wind instrument or string. It moves at its own pace. It really is a kind of language. Every book has developed its own idiom. And this book, in terms of time, for me at least, has been one where I get more out of it in reading small sections and spacing those sections judiciously. So instead of reading a whole chapter or part and then saying that's my reading, and then I'll give 5 days before I read the next part and let it sort of open in my brain, I'm finding within parts there are natural divisions. I would say natural divisions that then you want to space out by a day or 2 or a few days, because she's such a compressing stylist that, as we said in the first part, or our first video, the capitalizing of the nouns meant something. And here, that really wasn't so salient, but instead the peopling was a little salient. But now that you know that both of those have happened, they sort of comment on each other. But all of this is within the first part. And if one just went through that part quickly, it would sort of, I think, defeat what's cooking in this bowl, in this book. And so I don't know if that was your experience. I know you read it twice and the reading was different, but what would you say about the pacing in your own pacing?
Well, like I said before, because I'm reading through it for the third time now. So I'm definitely taking it slower now because I'm seeing more layers of meaning in there. Mm. And that was a really great catch. Yes, the capitalization has slowed way down as we move into the book. Isn't that interesting? It's almost like I remember some authors who write in a very heavy, like Irish dialect or something, to capture the Irish feeling of the era, and then over time they drop more and more and more of the dialect until later on, as you're reading the book, you're just reading it in normal English. Mm-hmm. But you're supposed to remember that flavor of the Irish dialect that was there in the beginning, because it would get too tedious if you had to read that Irish dialect all the time, all the way through. And so, yeah, I think that there's a little bit of that. If she had continued on with capitalizing every noun, after a while, it would start to feel like you're stumbling over rocks, you know. So she's established the weight of everything that's there in the world, and now she can just let things flow. I do want to tell you, as you move ahead, that this fundamentally is a mystery book. Mm. And at a certain point, the pace really picks up because you kind of get into the drama and the excitement of the mystery. But in the beginning, it's very, a very governed pace, just bringing you into his world and helping you to feel that world with him, and to feel the beauty of the house, and to feel the goodness of the house, and to recognize his gracious response to the house. All of that is established in the first few chapters.
And that's why patience is not a fiat. Money nowadays is fiat. It's not backed by gold. It doesn't have a substrate. And so when we're tempted to think that Bitcoin might just be as good as the dollar bill, because both have an underlying fiat. So it's really a question of bartering in the end, which means that theoretically, every single transaction with fiat currency is a reinvention of the wheel. You have to discover exactly what this might mean now for the other person. So let me get in there really quickly, figure out what it means right now, and then capitalize, find the highest layer, and then make that only the thing we talk about. Because there's no guarantee in the next instant that this particular lane will have any significance. It might all poof and be retransferred into or redistributed into Bitcoin. So I might as well get all I can right now. That's sort of the logic of fiat. Every instant is momentous, which means no instant really carries over or matters. Why save? Why have any security? It's all about risk, because it's really no risk, right? And even if one doesn't believe that every instant of the day when they're making economic exchanges, even having that as a possible buzz sort of is like acid. It sort of moves out. Yeah. Or it's a little flame.
Yeah, it's very
moves out all the time. You always know it's there, and it provokes anxiety. It's always that little flame above the rope at all times. It's not so close it'll take it, but I can start to smell the effect. In friendships, in love relationships, this happens. And this is why I think anxiety is often dismissed at the beginning in Christianity, for instance. In the Gospel of Matthew, don't be anxious about anything. It's an absolute sense in which he says, don't be anxious. Don't even let a little bit of the fly, not even its wing in the ointment, let alone the whole thing. And certainly don't think it's okay to have a fly in the ointment. Don't say it's key. Don't say it's unique. Don't say it gives it character, or you don't have the taste for it. Just don't say that. Don't do that because of the thing I said. Now, bring that into, where was I going with this?
You started out talking about patience.
Patience, yeah.
You said patience is not like a fiat.
Yeah, patience has a real substrate behind it, or it's not true patience, it's nominal patience. It's a patience that's always on the verge of being redefined. In other words, it's an anxious patience.
Yeah, gritting your
Patience that
teeth.
needs people rather than can be given to people. Okay, but what's the substrate of patience then? Well, Susanna Clark says, I would say in her thesis for this book, implicitly, capital nouns, capital letter nouns, they're the substrate for a non-anxious approach of one friend to another across time. But if we didn't have all those stable lines and walls and an understanding of the laws of the ecosystem of this house, then if the other doesn't look my way, when I need the other to look my way, now everything breaks down and I'm beside myself and nothing works. And therefore, look at me right now, right? Because if you don't, nothing will work. And then now the other has to become sort of a subservient entity to making everything work. Very weird. In the creation story, Eve and Adam are not put together until 6 days of creation. It's like the nouns with capital letters. Everything is put together. All the real substrates are set up. And then it's not instantaneous even. Adam is put there, names all the animals, feel the hole in the heart, and then, not even then, you got to go to sleep. Side has to be taken out, and then presentation, and then some line of poetry for recognition. It's staged, it's regular, and all of it requires patience, but it's not patience that's self-generated at the beginning. That patience begins probably, I don't know, maybe after the 500th name of an animal, somewhere in there, very late. But it couldn't have been sustained without all this preparation. So when we say that we should be patient for loved ones, I think people also need to hear that they don't have to generate that from the very bottom. Like, that's why there's even a world. There's a world so that we can experience love. That's why the world is here. Now, you may not believe that, but try to believe it. It'll help you be patient. And in being patient, one sees that it's true. That's why there is a world. It's not there is a world and I could have love. It's no, there is a world so that you can have love.
Because the substrate of all of that is the trust, right?
Yeah.
The trust in the one who created all of this. In our Sunday message this week, we had a message that probably other people have already thought about 1,000 times. So it may not be anything new for anybody, but for me, it was kind of ground shaking idea. I just thought it was, at least it gave me a whole new way to look at things. He was talking about the gospel and in how in the Greek, it's the euangelion, I would pronounce it evangelion. But it's the Greek word, and what it means is, and you probably already know this, is that when a new king took over in an area, or when the old king won a victory and brought in a new arena, brought in a new city into his conquered area, they would go into that city with trumpets and they would declare, this area has now been won by King, let's call him King Athelred, I don't know, some king, and or King Mortimer. King Mortimer now rules this territory. Well, for a lot of people in the village, that would have been good news. But for other people in the village, that would have been terrifying news, or maybe news that made them very apprehensive, or news that made them want to hide out somewhere or escape because of whatever political sect that they were involved in, or who knows. But the good news was not good news for everybody. It was only good news for the people who trusted that this king would be good for them. And so when we hear the good news about Jesus Christ, it has to come along with trust that, yes, indeed, he is good. And this is all stuff that I kind of added to the message in my own head because it seems obvious to me. But what the guy was talking about was the underlying meaning of the euangelion or the evangelion. It's this trumpet call that comes into the city and says, we have a new king. There's a whole lot of layers to that, which Absolutely. We don't have time to talk about now. But having a new king also means that the rules change. having a new king means that if you trust that this is a good king, you trust that he's going to be caring for you in a new way, and that you can be patient, and you can look up to him, and you can admire him and be thankful to him, and all of the things that would happen in a good kingdom. And that everything is going to be oriented around him and around his rule and his reign. And that's good news for the people who want it to be good news, but it's not good news for the people who don't want it to be good news. So a lot of it has to do with your perspective on things. And in this book, I really have to go now, but in this book, Piranesi has the attitude of thankfulness always, and an attitude of gracious admiration of the other, and appreciation for everything that comes his way. And as we will find out as things go on, if we were in that situation, we would not be grateful for what was there, because it turns out to be a pretty hard life. When you think about not having any technology at all, and you have to get all your own food, however you can get it, in this strange environment in which you're living, it turns out to be quite a trial. And yet he's always so thankful. He just has such a lovely attitude. So for anybody who's still watching, remember to like and subscribe. And also remember to tell us in the comments how you want us to proceed with this, because we can either jump through a section at a time, just pick out a few salient things, or we can keep going through piece by piece. So I appreciate you joining me, Matt.
Did you want a
last word?
Oh, definitely not the last word, but just a quick thing to what you said about the kingdom reign and the euangelion. I had someone say to me, the dogma of the two natures of Christ and them being without confusion, it's true. It's dogma. We don't have to explain it. We definitely should not speculate on why it's true and all these things. It's to keep us safe. One thing that can be said in it, and that can be a great source of comfort in patiently waiting for love, is as a man on the cross, he suffered. As God, he knew he suffered for you and me, even though we weren't born, because he's God and he knows everything. So one can take comfort if one wants to, knowing that when Christ was suffering, he knew you, and he knew that he was doing it for you. It means a lot to me.
There was a young man that we shared the gospel with in Japan, and when he came through to faith, he said the verse that struck him so powerfully was, I believe it's chapter 17 in the book of John. I believe it's 17, verse 11, maybe. I might be wrong on the verse. But Jesus is praying for his disciples, and he says, Father, I pray not only for them, but for those who will believe in me.
Exactly.
So you and I are in the will. Mm-hmm. Have a wonderful week, Matt. I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.